The muddy waters of the Arkansas River churned with a fury that spoke of 3 days of relentless spring rain, and Sophia Dawson felt her lungs burning as the current dragged her under for what she was certain would be the last time. She had been crossing the swollen river on horseback just minutes before, attempting to reach Fort Smith before nightfall in this April of 1876, when her mare had spooked at a floating tree branch and thrown her directly into the raging torrent. The horse had made it to the far bank, but Sophia had been swept downstream, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs like anchors determined to pull her to the river bottom. She clawed at the surface, gasping for air whenever her head broke through, tasting mud and terror in equal measure. The river seemed alive, a wild thing bent on destruction, and she was helpless against its power. Her vision blurred as water filled her mouth and nose. She thought of her sister waiting in Fort Smith, of the letter that had brought her all the way from St. Louis with promises of a fresh start and work at the new general store. She thought of her mother's grave back east and how she had promised to make something of herself, to survive and thrive in this untamed land. All of it seemed foolish now as the river claimed her. Then something impossibly strong cinched around her waist, cutting through the water's grip like divine intervention. The pressure was sudden and tight, and for a confused moment she thought perhaps a river monster had her, but then she was moving in a different direction, being hauled against the current with determined force. Her head broke the surface and she sucked in air, coughing and sputtering as she realized a rope was wrapped around her middle. She could hear a man's voice shouting something she could not make out over the roar of the water, and then her body was scraping against rocks and mud as she was pulled onto the western bank. She collapsed on solid ground, vomiting up river water and gasping like a landed fish. Strong hands turned her onto her side, helping her clear her lungs, and a deep voice kept saying, "Breathe! Just breathe now! You are safe!" When she could finally focus her eyes, she found herself looking up at a man crouched beside her, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his concern evident in every line of his posture. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun behind him, and he was coiling a lasso with practiced hands as he watched her with intense gray eyes. "Can you talk?" he asked, and his voice was rough like gravel, but somehow gentle at the same time. Sophia nodded, then coughed again. "I think so," she managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "Saw you go in from up the ridge," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. "Rode hard to get ahead of you. That river does not give up what it takes easily, especially not after these rains." She pushed herself up to sitting, aware suddenly of how her dress clung to her body, how her dark hair had come completely loose from its pins and hung in wet ropes down her back. She felt exposed and vulnerable, but the man had already turned his attention to scanning the riverbank, as if giving her privacy to collect herself. "My horse," she said, remembering. "A gray mare. Did you see where she went?" "Spotted her on the far bank about a quarter-mile down," he replied, looking back at her. "She will be fine. Question is, are you hurt? Any breaks or bad cuts?" Sophia took inventory of her body, moving her arms and legs experimentally. Everything ached and she could feel scrapes burning on her palms and knees, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. "I think I am intact," she said. "Bruised and humiliated, but intact." The hint of a smile touched his lips, the first warmth in his otherwise serious expression. "Nothing humiliating about nearly drowning in that monster," he said, nodding toward the river. "Takes a strong swimmer to survive what you just did. Most would have gone under and stayed there." "I was not exactly swimming," Sophia said, wringing water from her skirts with shaking hands. "More like flailing and panicking. Sometimes that is what survival looks like," he said. He stood and offered her his hand. "Can you stand? My camp is not far from here. You need to get warm and dry before you catch pneumonia." She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was calloused and sure, and he pulled her to her feet with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. I was trying to reach Fort Smith, she said. My sister is expecting me. Fort Smith is another 5 miles east, he said, and you will not make it there tonight, especially not on foot and soaked through. The sun is already setting. You can dry off at my camp, and I will help you retrieve your horse in the morning. Then you can continue on. Sophia knew she should be wary of strange men in the wilderness, but she also knew she had no other options. The temperature was already dropping as evening approached, and her wet clothes were beginning to make her shiver. Besides, this man had just saved her life. If he had meant her harm, he could have simply let the river do its work. I do not even know your name, she said, as he led her toward a path that climbed up from the riverbank. Lucas Hartley, he said. I run cattle about 20 miles north of here, but I have been tracking a mountain lion that has been taking calves. Lost the trail in the rain. I am Sophia Dawson, she replied. From St. Louis originally, though I suppose I am a resident of Arkansas now, if I survive my first day here. That almost smile touched his face again. You are tougher than you think, Miss Dawson. Not many people could have held on as long as you did in that current. His camp was modest but well organized, set in a clearing among cottonwood trees about 50 yards from the river. A sturdy bay horse was picketed nearby, and a small fire smoldered in a ring of stones. Lucas immediately set about building up the flames while Sophia stood dripping and shivering at the edge of the light. I have a spare blanket in my bedroll, he said, not looking at her as he fed sticks into the fire. You should get out of those wet things and wrap up in it. I will turn my back and tend to the fire. There are some bushes over there where you can have privacy. Sophia's teeth were chattering too hard to argue about propriety. She took the blanket he offered, rough wool that smelled of horse and wood smoke, and retreated behind the indicated bushes. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, stiff with cold and river mud, but she finally managed to peel the sodden garment off along with her petticoats and undergarments. She wrung as much water from them as she could, then wrapped herself in the blanket and emerged barefoot into the firelight. Lucas had strung a line between two trees and gestured to it without looking directly at her. You can hang your things there to dry, he said. I am making coffee. It is not much, but it will warm you up. She hung her clothes carefully, trying to maintain some modesty, even though the blanket covered her from shoulders to ankles. When she settled near the fire, Lucas handed her a tin cup filled with steaming black coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint and tasted faintly of the river water he must have used to make it, but it was hot and Sophia drank it gratefully. Thank you, she said after a long moment of silence, broken only by the crackling fire. I mean it. You did not have to help me. You could have just ridden on. Lucas was sitting across the fire from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. His hat was pushed back now, and she could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see more than most people. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, faded but noticeable in the firelight. Could not have lived with myself if I had done that, he said simply. My mother raised me better. Besides, leaving someone to die when you can help is not just wrong. It is cowardly. Where is your mother now? Sophia asked, then immediately felt intrusive. I apologize. That is none of my business. She passed 6 years ago, Lucas said, his voice even but with an undercurrent of old pain. Fever took her the same winter my father died, from a fall off a horse. I was 19, just back from working a cattle drive up to Kansas. Came home to find them both buried on the ridge above our ranch. I am so sorry, Sophia said softly. I lost my mother 2 years ago. My father died when I was 12. It is a lonely thing, being an orphan in the world. Lucas met her eyes across the fire. It is, he agreed. But it also makes you stronger if you let it. You learn to rely on yourself. Is that why you are out here alone, tracking mountain lions? Someone has to do it, he said with a shrug. The lion has taken 3 calves in the last 2 weeks. Cannot afford to lose any more. The ranch is small, just me and two hands working it. Every head of cattle counts. They talked as the darkness deepened around them, and the stars emerged in a vast canopy overhead. Sophia told him about her sister Margaret, who had married a businessman in Fort Smith and had written urging Sophia to come west and start fresh. She told him about her work as a seamstress in St. Louis, how she had saved every penny for 2 years to afford the train fare and the stagecoach ride, only to end up nearly drowning within sight of her destination. Lucas listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and measured. He told her about his ranch, about the satisfaction of working land that had belonged to his family, about the challenges of competing with larger outfits that had more resources and more men. He told her about his bay horse, Ranger, who he had raised from a colt and who was smart enough to practically read his mind. "You love it," Sophia said, watching the way his face changed when he talked about the ranch, the hardness softening into something almost tender. "The land, the work, all of it." "I do," he admitted. "It is hard, and some years it barely pays, and there are times when I wonder if I am a fool for trying to hold on to it. But when I ride out in the morning and see the sun coming up over the hills, when I work a good horse and move cattle that are healthy and fat, when I sit by a campfire at night and know that I built something with my own hands and my own sweat, yes, I love it." There was a passion in his voice that stirred something in Sophia's chest, a longing she had not known she possessed. She had spent so much of her life in cities, in cramped rooms and crowded streets, that the idea of open land and endless sky felt both foreign and deeply appealing. "I think you are very lucky," she said quietly, "to know what you want and to have the courage to fight for it." "You came all the way from St. Louis to start over," Lucas pointed out. "That takes courage too. Different kind maybe, but just as real." She smiled at him, the first real smile since she had dragged herself from the river. "I suppose when you put it that way, we are both stubborn fools unwilling to give up." "I will drink to that," Lucas said, raising his coffee cup, and Sophia clinked hers against it. As the night grew colder, Lucas added more wood to the fire and gave her another blanket from his pack. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Morning will come early, and we have a horse to catch." Sophia lay down near the fire, wrapped in the blankets with her damp hair spread out to dry. She should have felt afraid or uncomfortable, alone in the wilderness with a strange man, but instead she felt oddly safe. Lucas had positioned himself on the opposite side of the fire, his bedroll arranged so he was between her and the dark forest beyond. She could hear him moving occasionally, adding wood to keep the flames steady, and the sound was comforting rather than alarming. She drifted into an exhausted sleep, filled with dreams of rushing water and strong hands pulling her toward safety. When she woke, the sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and Lucas was already up, saddling Ranger with efficient movements. Sophia's clothes were still damp but no longer dripping, and she retreated behind the bushes to dress with stiff, aching muscles. Everything hurt, and when she examined her hands and knees, she found them scraped raw and bruised purple in places. The river had marked her, but she was alive. Lucas had made more coffee and offered her a piece of hard bread and some dried beef for breakfast. It was not much, but Sophia ate gratefully, surprised by her own hunger. "We will ride downstream and see if we can spot your mare," Lucas said as they broke camp. "If she stayed near the bank, she should be easy enough to find. Horses do not usually wander far after a scare like that." Sophia nodded, then realized a problem. "I have no saddle," she said. "It was still on the mare when she bolted. If we find her, she might still be wearing it, but I have no way to ride otherwise." "You can ride double with me on Ranger," Lucas said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "He is strong enough to carry us both for a few miles." So Sophia found herself sitting behind Lucas on the bay horse, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep her balance, the blanket draped over her shoulders like a shawl. It was intimate in a way that made her acutely aware of the man in front of her, the solid warmth of his body, the way he moved with the horse as if they were one creature. She could feel the muscles of his back through his shirt, could smell the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. They rode along the river bank as the sun climbed higher, and sure enough, after about half an hour, they spotted the gray mare grazing calmly near a stand of willows. The saddle was still on her back, though the stirrups were caked with mud, and one of the saddlebags was torn. Lucas dismounted and approached the mare slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The horse raised her head, but did not bolt, and within minutes he had caught her reins. He led her back to where Sophia waited, examining the saddle and tack with a critical eye. "She is sound," he announced. "The saddle is still good. You lost some things from the bag, but the rest is intact. You were lucky, Miss Dawson." "I had help from a skilled cowboy," Sophia said, and was rewarded with that brief, rare smile. Lucas helped her mount the mare, his hands steadying her as she settled into the saddle. Her legs protested the movement, muscles screaming from her ordeal in the river, but she gritted her teeth and gathered the reins. "Fort Smith is that way," Lucas said, pointing east. "Stay on this trail, and you will reach it by midday. The river runs alongside most of the way, but the path is well above the water. You should be safe enough." Sophia looked down at him, this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life, and asked nothing in return. She did not want to leave, she realized with a start. Despite everything, despite the fear and pain and exhaustion, this brief time with Lucas Hartley had felt right in a way she could not explain. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Lucas looked up at her, shading his eyes against the morning sun. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite name. "Fort Smith is not far from my ranch," he said slowly. "I come into town for supplies every few weeks. I suppose our paths might cross." "I hope they do," Sophia said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. "Ride safe, Miss Dawson," Lucas said, stepping back, "and stay away from swollen rivers." She laughed despite herself. "I will do my best." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both casual and courtly. "My pleasure, madam." Sophia turned the mare east and urged her into a walk, but she could not resist looking back after a few yards. Lucas was still standing there, watching her go, his figure dark against the morning sky. She raised her hand in farewell, and he returned the gesture. Then she forced herself to face forward and focus on the trail ahead. Fort Smith emerged from the landscape like a promise made solid. It was larger than Sophia had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, a proper hotel, churches, stores, and houses spreading out from the center. The Arkansas River curved along the southern edge of town, and she could see the remains of an old military fort that gave the place its name. The town hummed with activity even on this weekday morning, with wagons and horses filling the main street and people going about their business with purposeful strides. Sophia asked directions from a man loading lumber onto a wagon, and he pointed her toward a white house with green shutters on the north side of town. Her sister's house. The sight of it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She had made it, despite everything. She was here. She dismounted carefully, tying the mare to the fence, and walked up the path to the front door on trembling legs. Before she could knock, the door flew open, and Margaret was there, her face a mirror of Sophia's own, but rounder and softened by happiness and good living. "Sophia!" Margaret cried, and then she was pulling her into a fierce hug. "Oh, my lord, you look like you have been dragged through a mud pit backward. What happened? We expected you yesterday." The whole story came tumbling out as Margaret ushered her inside, where Margaret's husband Thomas greeted her warmly and immediately offered to stable her horse. Margaret drew a hot bath while Sophia talked, the words spilling faster and faster as she described the river crossing, the terrifying current, the lasso around her waist, and the strong hands pulling her to safety. This cowboy, Margaret said, helping Sophia wash her hair as she soaked in the tub. What was his name again? Lucas Hartley, Sophia said, closing her eyes as her sister's fingers worked soap through the tangles. He runs a ranch north of here. Hartley, Margaret repeated thoughtfully. I think Thomas mentioned that name. Small ranch, been in his family for years. They say he is a hard worker, keeps to himself mostly. Lost his parents young and has been running the place alone since. He saved my life, Margaret, Sophia said softly. He did not have to, but he did, and he was kind, gentle even. He gave me his blankets and made sure I was safe through the night. Margaret made a knowing sound in her throat. And handsome, I assume? Sophia opened her eyes and found her sister watching her with a teasing smile. That is hardly relevant. It is always relevant, Margaret said firmly. And you are blushing, which tells me everything I need to know. I only just met him. Guillermo, Sophia protested. I was half drowned and terrified. It would be absurd to think anything of it. The heart does not wait for convenient moments, Margaret said, rinsing Sophia's hair with clean water. It takes one look and knows. That is how it was with Thomas and me. Sophia wanted to argue, but she could not, because the truth was that something had shifted in her when she looked into Lucas Hartley's gray eyes. Something had recognized something, a connection that felt both brand new and ancient at the same time. She had felt safe with him in a way that went beyond mere gratitude for rescue. She had felt seen. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophia settled into life in Fort Smith. Margaret helped her find a position at the general store, where her sewing skills were immediately put to use repairing damaged goods and making simple garments to sell. The owner, Mr. Peterson, was a kind man with a sharp business mind, and he seemed pleased with her work. Sophia found lodging in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, a no-nonsense woman who served hearty meals and kept a clean establishment. Sophia liked the work and the town. She made friends with the other women who worked at the store, attended church with Margaret and Thomas on Sundays, and began to feel like she belonged in this new place. But through it all, she found herself thinking about Lucas Hartley. She wondered how his hunt for the mountain lion had gone, whether his cattle were safe, whether he thought about her at all, or if she had been just another person in need of help, quickly forgotten once she rode away. She got her answer on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the river incident. She was in the general store, rearranging bolts of fabric by color, when the bell above the door chimed and she looked up to see Lucas walking in. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, his face freshly shaved and his clothes neat, though he still wore the same wide-brimmed hat and carried himself with that quiet confidence she remembered. Their eyes met across the store, and Sophia felt her breath catch. His face lit up with unmistakable pleasure, that rare smile appearing and transforming his serious features. "Miss Dawson," he said, crossing to where she stood. "I was hoping I might run into you. How are you faring after your adventure?" "Much better, thank you," she managed, acutely aware of how fast her heart was beating. "No lasting damage except some bruises that have finally faded. And please call me Sophia." "Only if you call me Lucas," he replied. His eyes scanned her face, as if memorizing it. "You look well. Fort Smith must be agreeing with you." "It is," she said. "I am working here at the store, and I have found a good place to stay. My sister has been wonderful about helping me settle in. What brings you to town?" "Supplies, mostly," Lucas said. "Need to stock up before I head back to the ranch. And I wanted to check that you had made it here safely. I know you did, of course, but I wanted to see for myself." The admission made Sophia's chest feel warm. "That is very kind of you." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, until Mr. Peterson called from the back of the store, asking Sophia to help him with an inventory question. She excused herself reluctantly, but when she returned to the front a few minutes later, Lucas was still there, examining some rope as if it required his full attention. "Are you free for lunch?" he asked when she approached. "There is a decent restaurant down the street. I would like to hear how you have been, and I owe you a proper meal after feeding you nothing but hard bread and dried beef." Sophia glanced at Mr. Peterson, who made a shooing motion. "Go on," he said with a grin. "You have been working nonstop all week. Take an hour." So Sophia found herself walking down the main street of Fort Smith with Lucas Hartley at her side, feeling like the whole town was watching them. And perhaps they were. Fort Smith was small enough that a new woman walking with a local rancher was bound to attract attention and speculation. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of good cooking filling the air. They sat across from each other at a corner table, and for a moment Sophia felt shy, unsure of what to say, now that they were not in the midst of crisis or exhaustion. But Lucas made it easy. He asked about her work, about her sister, about what she thought of Arkansas compared to Missouri. She asked about his ranch, and his face animated as he told her about finally catching and killing the mountain lion, about a new colt that had been born healthy and strong, about his plans to expand his herd if the year went well. "It sounds like hard work," Sophia said, watching him over her plate of chicken and potatoes. "It is," Lucas agreed. "But it is good work, honest work. At the end of the day, I can see what I have accomplished. There is satisfaction in that." "I think I understand," Sophia said. "When I finish a dress or repair something so well you cannot see the tear, there is pride in that, knowing that I made something better with my own hands." "Exactly," Lucas said, and his smile was full and genuine now, his eyes warm. "You understand." They talked until Sophia realized with a start that she had been gone for nearly 2 hours. She apologized profusely to Mr. Peterson when she returned, but he waved off her concern with a knowing look. After that, Lucas began coming to town more frequently, always with a legitimate reason, always with supplies to buy or business to conduct, but he always found time to stop by the general store and talk to Sophia. Sometimes they would have lunch together again. Other times, he would simply stand by her counter and chat while she worked, telling her stories about ranch life or asking her opinion on some purchase he was considering. The other women at the store teased her mercilessly, but Sophia did not mind. She found herself watching for him, her heart lifting every time she heard the bell above the door chime and turned to see if it might be him. More often than not these days, it was. One evening in early May, Lucas asked if she would like to go for a walk after she finished work. They strolled through town as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and ended up sitting on a bench near the river, well upstream from where Sophia had nearly drowned. "I need to tell you something," Lucas said, his voice serious in the gathering dusk. "I have been thinking about you since the day I pulled you from that river. I tried to talk myself out of it, told myself I was being foolish, that I barely knew you, but it has not worked. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face. Every time I am working, I find myself wanting to tell you about it, wanting to hear what you would say. I know I am just a rancher without much to offer, and you are smart and beautiful, and could probably have any man you wanted, but I am asking anyway. May I court you properly, Sophia? May I see if what I feel might be something you feel too?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. She reached for his hand, rough and calloused, and held it tightly. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Lucas, I feel it too. I have felt it since that first night by the fire. I thought I was losing my mind, falling for someone I had just met, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, everything feels right." Lucas let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and squeezed her hand. "I am glad," he said roughly. "I am very glad." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender and old-fashioned that it made Sophia's heart ache with affection. They sat there as the stars emerged, hands linked, talking quietly about the future in tentative, hopeful terms. The courtship that followed was proper but passionate in its own quiet way. Lucas came to town every week, sometimes twice a week, and they spent every moment they could together. He took her on picnics in the countryside, showing her the land he loved with such evident pride. She introduced him to Margaret and Thomas, and they approved of him immediately, especially after Margaret whispered to Sophia that she could see how Lucas looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. On Sundays, after church, Lucas would have dinner with Sophia and her sister's family, and Thomas and Lucas would talk about cattle and crops, while Margaret and Sophia exchanged significant glances across the table. Mrs. Fletcher at the boarding house took to leaving the parlor free on the evenings when Lucas visited, giving them space to sit together and talk. Their first kiss happened on a June evening, 2 months after they had met. Lucas had driven Sophia out to see his ranch for the first time, and she had fallen in love with it immediately. The house was small but well built, with a wide porch that overlooked rolling hills dotted with cattle. The barn was neat and organized, and there was a vegetable garden that Lucas admitted he had been neglecting since his mother's death. "I could help with that," Sophia said, standing in the overgrown garden and envisioning what it could be. "If you wanted, I am not much of a gardener, but I could learn." Lucas had been standing a few feet away, but at her words he closed the distance between them. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" he asked, his voice low and intent. Sophia turned to face him, her heart racing. "I suppose I am saying that I can see a future here, with you, if you want that too." "I want that more than anything," Lucas said, and then his hands were cupping her face and his lips were on hers, gentle at first but deepening with a passion that made her knees weak. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her hope and fear and love into it. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you, Sophia Dawson," Lucas said, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I have loved you since I saw you fighting that river, too stubborn to give up even when any sane person would have. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I love you too," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know it is fast. I know people will say we are crazy, but I do not care. I love you, Lucas Hartley." They were married in August, 3 months after Lucas's proposal and 4 months after Sophia nearly drowned in the Arkansas River. The wedding was small but joyful, held in the church in Fort Smith with Margaret and Thomas standing up with them and half the town in attendance. Sophia wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Lucas wore his Sunday best with a new hat he had bought special for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Margaret hugged Sophia so hard she could barely breathe and whispered, "I knew it. I knew from the moment you told me about him." The ranch became Sophia's home, and she loved it as much as Lucas did. She learned to cook meals for the ranch hands, to tend the vegetable garden until it flourished, to keep the house clean and comfortable. Lucas taught her to ride properly, to handle cattle, to read the weather and the land. They worked side by side, building something together, and at night they fell into each other's arms with a passion that never seemed to fade. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There was a drought that summer that made water scarce and tested Lucas's small herd. There were nights when Sophia felt lonely, while Lucas was out on the range for days at a time. There were moments of frustration as they learned to live together, to navigate each other's habits and quirks. But through it all, they had each other. When Lucas came home exhausted and discouraged after losing a steer to illness, Sophia held him and reminded him of everything they had accomplished. When Sophia struggled with homesickness for her old life, Lucas sat with her and listened until she felt better, then made her laugh with stories about the ranch hand's antics. In the spring of 1877, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same porch where he had first kissed her, all those months ago. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the yard. He picked her up and spun her around carefully, kissing her face all over until she was laughing and breathless. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." Their son was born in November, a healthy boy with Lucas's gray eyes and Sophia's dark hair. They named him William after Lucas's father, and he was perfect in every way. Sophia had never known love like this existed. The fierce protective tenderness she felt watching Lucas hold their son, the way her heart seemed to expand to impossible sizes. Lucas was a devoted father. He would sit up with William at night when the baby cried, rocking him and singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate designs that must have taken hours of painstaking work. He talked to William constantly, telling him about the ranch and the cattle and everything they would do together when the boy was older. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Lucas's herd grew, and he was able to hire another hand to help with the work. Sophia's garden produced vegetables enough to sell in town, adding to their income. They built an addition onto the house, giving William his own room and creating space for the children they hoped would follow. Those children came in time. A daughter named Emma in 1879 with Sophia's smile and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. Another son, James, in 1881, who looked like a miniature version of Lucas from the day he was born. Each child was welcomed with joy, each one another blessing in a life that seemed overflowing with them. Sophia often thought about the day she nearly drowned, about how close she had come to never having any of this. If Lucas had been a few minutes slower, if he had been hunting in a different area, if his lasso had missed its mark, she would have died in that river. Instead, she had been given this life, this love, this family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised her with a trip back to the spot where he had pulled her from the river. They rode out together on a summer morning, leaving the children with Margaret and Thomas, and stood on the bank looking at the water, peaceful now and flowing gently. "I think about this day all the time," Lucas said, his arm around Sophia's waist. "I think about how easily I could have lost you before I ever really found you." "But you did not," Sophia said, leaning into him. "You saved me, Lucas, in more ways than one. Before I came here, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live." "You gave me the same," Lucas said, turning her to face him. "This ranch, it was my whole world. But it was empty. I was empty. You filled all those empty spaces, Sophia. You and our children. You are everything." He kissed her there, by the river that had nearly taken her, and Sophia kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. The past 5 years had been the happiest of her life, and she knew with certainty that the future would be even better. They had built something real and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had built a family, a home, a life together. As they rode back to the ranch, Sophia thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her parents, the hard years in St. Louis, the long journey west, the terrifying plunge into the raging river. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been leading her here, to this man, to this life. She would not change a single thing. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. William grew tall and strong, learning to work cattle alongside his father with a natural skill that made Lucas beam with pride. Emma became Sophia's shadow, learning to cook and sew and tend the garden, her laughter a constant music in the house. James was the wild one, always climbing things and getting into mischief, keeping both parents on their toes. In 1883, when Sophia was 30 years old, they had their 4th and final child, another daughter they named Rose. She was the baby of the family, doted on by her older siblings and her parents alike. Lucas said their family was complete now, that they had been blessed beyond measure, and Sophia agreed. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Lucas's reputation as an honest, hardworking cattleman spread, and he began to get contracts to supply beef to Fort Smith and even to Little Rock. The small ranch he had been struggling to maintain alone had become a thriving operation, and they were able to build a proper ranch house to replace the small cabin Lucas had grown up in. The new house was Sophia's dream made real, with a large kitchen, separate bedrooms for all the children, a parlor for entertaining, and a wraparound porch that Lucas insisted on because he knew how much she loved sitting outside in the evenings. They moved in during the summer of 1885, and Sophia cried happy tears as she arranged their furniture and hung curtains in the windows. Margaret and Thomas visited often, their own children playing with Sophia and Lucas's brood in the yard, while the adults talked on the porch. Margaret often remarked on how happy Sophia looked, how right she had been to come west and start over. "You and Lucas are proof that love at first sight is real," Margaret said one afternoon as they watched their children play. "I have never seen two people more perfectly suited to each other. I was drowning, and he threw me a lifeline," Sophia said softly. "In every sense of those words, I will be grateful for that every day for the rest of my life." Lucas's two ranch hands, Pete and Sam, became like family over the years. They were invited to Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, and they taught the children to rope and ride with patience and good humor. Pete, who was the older of the two, eventually married a widow from town and brought her to live in the smaller house on the ranch property. Sam courted a girl from Fort Smith and married her in 1886, and they too settled on the ranch. The sense of community, of extended family, made the ranch feel even more like home. There were always people around, always laughter and conversation, always hands to help with the work and hearts to share in the joys and sorrows of life. In 1888, when William turned 11, Lucas began teaching him seriously about running the ranch. He took the boy with him on longer trips, showed him how to keep the account books, involved him in decisions about breeding stock and grazing rotation. William soaked it all up like a sponge, and Sophia could see that he would be ready to take over the ranch someday, continuing the legacy Lucas had worked so hard to build. Emma, at 9, was already an accomplished seamstress, her stitches neater and more even than Sophia's own. Sophia began taking orders for dresses and shirts from women in town, and Emma helped with the simpler pieces. They would sit together in the parlor in the evenings, needles flashing in the lamplight, talking about everything and nothing. James, at 7, had declared he wanted to be a Texas Ranger when he grew up, inspired by stories he had heard in town. Lucas humored him, but also made sure the boy understood the importance of the ranch, the value of the life they were building. Sophia suspected James would grow out of his ranger dreams eventually, but for now she enjoyed his enthusiasm and his wild imagination. Rose, at 5, was everyone's darling. She had Sophia's dark curls and Lucas's gray eyes, and a sweetness of temperament that made her beloved by all who met her. She followed her father everywhere, chattering constantly, and Lucas never seemed to tire of her company. One night in the fall of 1889, after all the children were in bed, Sophia and Lucas sat on their porch swing watching the stars. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of busy days, and Sophia treasured it. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" she asked, her head on his shoulder. "If you had not been in that exact spot at that exact time?" "All the time," Lucas admitted, "and it terrifies me, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. Cannot imagine this ranch without your touch everywhere. Cannot imagine raising children with anyone else. Cannot imagine sleeping alone in a bed that does not have you in it." Sophia lifted her head to look at him. Even after more than 12 years of marriage, he still made her heart race. There was gray at his temples now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her he was as handsome as the day he had pulled her from the river. "I love you," she said simply, "more now than I did when we married, which I would not have thought possible. You are the best man I have ever known, Lucas Hartley." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a kiss that held 12 years of love and commitment and partnership. "And you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said against her lips. "You took a half-broken ranch and a lonely cowboy and made them into a home and a family. That takes a special kind of magic." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Sophia thought about all they had built together, all they had survived, all they had created. Their marriage had not been perfect. There had been arguments and difficulties and moments of real struggle, but they had faced everything together. They had been partners in the truest sense of the word. The 1890s brought new challenges and new triumphs. There was a harsh winter in 1891 that killed some of their cattle and tested their reserves. There was a summer drought in 1893 that made water scarce and forced Lucas to make hard decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep. But the ranch survived, and so did they, leaner but wiser for the experience. William turned 18 in 1895, and Lucas made him a full partner in the ranch, recognizing that his son had earned the responsibility. Emma at 16 had suitors calling at the house, though none of them seemed quite good enough in Lucas's opinion. James at 14 had indeed grown out of his ranger dreams and now talked about expanding the ranch, about buying more land and running more cattle. Rose at 12 was growing into a beautiful young woman with a talent for music that they nurtured by buying her a piano that had to be hauled all the way from Little Rock. As their children grew and began to make their own paths in the world, Sophia and Lucas found themselves with more time alone together. It was a different season of their marriage, no less loving but quieter, more reflective. They would take long rides together across their land, just the two of them, remembering the early days when it had been just them against the world. In 1897, Emma married a young man named Robert, the son of a neighboring rancher. It was a good match, and the wedding was a grand affair that brought people from all over the county. Sophia cried as she watched her daughter stand at the altar, so beautiful in her wedding dress that it hurt to look at her. Lucas held Sophia's hand through the ceremony, his own eyes suspiciously bright. William married 2 years later, choosing a sensible girl from Fort Smith named Catherine, who proved to be a wonderful addition to the family. They built a house on the ranch property, not far from the main house, and began their own life together while still being part of the larger ranch operation. The new century arrived, bringing with it changes and modernization that seemed to happen faster and faster. There was talk of automobiles, though Lucas declared he would stick with horses as long as he lived. Electricity was coming to Fort Smith, though it would be years before it reached the rural areas. The world was transforming, but the ranch remained a constant, a place where the old ways still mattered and the land still dictated the rhythm of life. In 1901, Emma gave birth to Sophia and Lucas's first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas after his grandfather. Sophia held the baby in her arms and felt her heart expand yet again with love she had not known she could contain. Lucas was besotted with his grandson, carrying him around the ranch and talking to him just as he had done with their own children. William and Catherine had a daughter the following year, then another son after that. The ranch began to fill with the sounds of grandchildren, and Sophia found herself in the role of grandmother, a position she embraced with joy. She taught her grandchildren to bake and sew, told them stories of their parents as children, spoiled them outrageously the way grandparents are supposed to do. James, ever the ambitious one, convinced Lucas to buy additional grazing land in 1903, expanding the ranch's footprint significantly. It was a risk, but it paid off, and the ranch continued to prosper. Rose, who had not married despite several proposals, announced that she wanted to become a teacher. She attended a normal school in Little Rock and returned to Fort Smith to teach at the local school, living at home but pursuing her own path with the full support of her parents. In 1905, Sophia and Lucas celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 50s now, gray-haired and weathered, but still strong, still working, still deeply in love. They had grandchildren running around their property, children who had built lives and families of their own, and a ranch that had grown beyond anything Lucas had dreamed possible when he was a young man struggling alone. That anniversary evening, they rode out to the river, just as they had done on their 5th anniversary and on many anniversaries since. It had become their tradition, returning to the place where their story had begun. The river flowed peacefully, as it did most of the time, giving no hint of the wild fury it could unleash in the spring. 27 years, Lucas said, standing with his arm around Sophia's waist in the spot where he had pulled her ashore. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Sophia said, leaning into him. Every day with you is new and wonderful, but I also cannot remember a time when you were not the center of my world. I was so scared that day, Lucas admitted, something he had never said before. When I saw you in that water, fighting so hard but losing ground, I was terrified I would not reach you in time, that I would have to watch you disappear under the surface and not be able to do anything about it. But you did reach me, Sophia said, turning in his arms to face him. You saved me, Lucas, and then you loved me, and you gave me this incredible life. I was drowning in more ways than one when I came west, drowning in grief and loneliness and uncertainty. You pulled me out of all of it. We saved each other, Lucas said, cupping her face in his hands the way he had done so many times over the years. I was drowning too, in loneliness and the weight of responsibility and the fear that I would always be alone. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, Sophia. You gave me hope and love and a family. You gave me everything. They kissed there by the river as the sun set, two people who had built a life together from a chance encounter and a desperate rescue. 27 years later, their love was deeper and richer than ever, tempered by time and hardship into something unbreakable. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. William took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Lucas slowly stepped back, though Lucas still rode out most days to check on the cattle and oversee the work. Emma's family thrived on their neighboring ranch, and the two families remained close, combining for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. James married at 30, finally finding a woman who could match his energy and ambition, and they began talking about starting a second ranch operation further north. Rose continued teaching, beloved by her students and respected in the community. In 1910, Sophia and Lucas celebrated their 32nd anniversary. They were in their late 50s now, still healthy but feeling the weight of the years in aching joints and slower movements. But their love had not diminished with age. If anything, it had grown stronger, more essential, the bedrock upon which everything else in their lives was built. They sat on their porch one evening that summer, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had come for a family gathering. The ranch hummed with activity and conversation, and Sophia looked around at all they had created and felt a profound sense of gratitude. No regrets, she said to Lucas, taking his hand. Not a single one. None, he agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. How could I regret anything about a life that brought me you? As the sun set over the Arkansas hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Sophia leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder and closed her eyes. She could hear the voices of their family around them, could feel the warm evening breeze on her face, could sense the solid strength of the man beside her who had been her partner, her love, her everything for more than 3 decades. She had been drowning once, pulled under by forces beyond her control, certain she would die alone and forgotten in a raging river. But Lucas Hartley had thrown her a lifeline, had pulled her to safety with his rope and his strength and his courage. He had given her a chance at life, and together they had made that life into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down to their children and their children's children. The love they had built would echo through the generations, a legacy more valuable than any amount of land or cattle. They had started with nothing but each other and the determination to survive, and they had created something that would endure. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Lucas wrapped his arm around Sophia, and she snuggled closer to him. They sat in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had never let go. Around them, their family laughed and talked, their legacy living and breathing, and full of promise for the future. It had all started with a river gone wild and a cowboy with a lasso, but it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of courage and compassion and commitment. It had become a life well lived, a family well loved, a dream made real through hard work and devotion. Sophia Dawson Hartley closed her eyes and smiled, her hand in her husband's hand, her heart full to overflowing. She had been drowning once, but Lucas had saved her, and in return, she had given him everything she had, everything she was. Together, they had built something that would outlast them both, something that would stand as proof that true love not only exists, but can conquer anything. The years passed gently after that, filled with the quiet joys of a life well lived. Lucas and Sophia grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried on the traditions they had established. They remained partners until the very end, still holding hands on the porch swing, still taking rides out to the river where their story had begun, still looking at each other with the same love and devotion that had bloomed on that desperate day so many years before. When people asked Sophia about her life, about how she and Lucas had built such a strong marriage and successful ranch, she always told them the same thing. She told them about the river, about the terror of drowning, about the rope that had cinched around her waist and pulled her to safety, and then she told them the truth that she had learned in the decades since. Love is like that rope, she would say. It catches you when you are falling, pulls you to safety when you are lost, and holds you steady when the world tries to tear you apart. All you have to do is hold on tight and trust in the strength of the person on the other end. She had held on tight to Lucas Hartley from that very first day, and he had held on just as tightly to her. Together, they had weathered every storm, celebrated every triumph, and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had taken a moment of desperate rescue and transformed it into a lifetime of love. And when Sophia finally closed her eyes for the last time many years later, she did so with Lucas's hand in hers and a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved completely. She had been drowning once, but she had been saved, and that salvation had given her everything that mattered, everything that would last forever, in the hearts of those she left behind. Their story became legend in Fort Smith and the surrounding ranching community, the tale of the woman who nearly drowned in the Arkansas River and the cowboy who saved her with his lasso. But those who knew them best understood that the real story was what came after, the decades of love and partnership and family that grew from that single moment of courage and connection. The ranch remained in the Hartley family for generations, a testament to everything Lucas and Sophia had built together. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arkansas hills, their descendants would sometimes ride out to the spot by the river where it all began. They would stand there and remember the story they had been told since childhood about the drowning woman and the cowboy hero, about the lasso that saved a life and started a legacy. But more than that, they remembered the love, the fierce, devoted, unshakable love that had sustained Lucas and Sophia through good times and bad, through hardship and prosperity, through youth and old age. That love had been the foundation of everything, the force that had built a family and a home and a life worth living. And as the river flowed peacefully past, carrying water toward an unknown destination, just as it had done on that fateful day so long ago, the Hartley descendants would smile and take their loved ones' hands. They would remember that love is worth fighting for, worth holding on to, worth building a life around. They would remember that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a rope around the waist and strong hands pulling you to safety. And sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet man with gray eyes who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to love you anyway. That was the legacy Lucas and Sophia Hartley left behind. Not just a ranch or a family name, but a reminder that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world. It can save lives, build dreams, and create legacies that echo through time. Sophia had been drowning in a river gone wild, and Lucas had lassoed her waist and pulled her ashore. But that was just the beginning of their story. The rest of it, The beautiful, challenging, joyful rest of it was what they had built together in all the years that followed. And it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth holding on to as proof that love can conquer anything, even the wildest river, even the deepest despair, even the impossible odds. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the dramatic rescue or the near death experience, but the life that came after. The laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days and extraordinary moments that added up to a lifetime of love. That was the real story, the one that deserved to be told and retold, the one that would inspire others to hold on tight to their own loves and build their own legacies. Sophia and Lucas Hartley had lived that story, had written it with their lives and their love, and it was a masterpiece. A Wild West romance that began with a drowning woman and a cowboy's lasso and became something timeless and true. Something that proved love at first sight could last a lifetime. Something that showed how two people could become one without losing themselves, how they could build something greater together than either could have achieved alone. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and grief and the inevitable passage of time. But the love they had shared did not end. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the memories of everyone who had known them. It lived on as an example of what love could be when it was nurtured and protected and allowed to grow deep roots. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures standing by the river, hand in hand, looking at each other with expressions of such devotion that it made the heart ache. Whether it was truly the spirits of Lucas and Sophia, or simply the power of their story making people see what they wanted to see, no one could say for certain. But it did not really matter, because the truth of their love was undeniable, written in the land they had worked, the family they had raised, the legacy they had left behind. Sophia had been drowning, and Lucas had saved her. And then together, they had saved each other over and over again for the rest of their lives. That was their story. That was their truth. That was their gift to everyone who came after them, a reminder that love is always worth the risk, always worth the fight, always worth holding on to with everything you have. And as the Arkansas River continued its eternal flow, carrying water and stories and dreams toward distant horizons, the legacy of Lucas and Sophia Hartley remained strong and true, a beacon of hope and love that would shine through the generations, lighting the way for others who were brave enough to take a chance on love and build something beautiful from it.